A 25-year-old woman lost her life on Mattapan Street while sitting next to her fiancé in a parked car. The person responsible wasn't a stranger. He was someone she had known since middle school, someone she had trusted, someone she had been kind to for years. And the reason he did what he did, the reason prosecutors would later stand in court and call this a targeted, deliberate act, was because she didn't want to be with him. He had notebooks hidden under his bed, filled with writing about her. One of them was dedicated to her with a line that read, "A love never to be mine." He had followed her to and from work. He had learned her schedule. And on the night of February 19th, 2012, he used everything he knew about her life to put himself exactly where she would be. The case would go cold for more than a year. Now, the question is, how could a case with such glaring facts go cold for more than a year, leaving a grieving family without closure for so long? Stay with me as I unravel a case that should never be forgotten in a hurry.
Christopher stalked her and methodically planned and murdered her. He left us all feeling empty. There will never be children or grandchildren, weddings or anniversaries.
This is the story of Keosha Nicole Gilmore, and everything about it, from who she was to who took her life to what it cost her family to survive the wait, deserves to be told fully. Keosha was born on November 11, 1986. She grew up in Boston, a city where people tend to know each other across multiple phases of their lives. And Keosha knew a lot of people, not because she imposes herself on people or because she made herself the center of anything, but because of the kind of person she actually was. Her mother, Gloria Weathersby, described her this way: a heart as big as the world, compassionate, caring, non-judgmental, a friend to everyone she met. Those words were spoken in a courtroom, in front of a judge, on the day the man responsible was sentenced, and you could hear in them exactly what kind of loss this family was carrying. It was a grief too heavy for words to communicate. Keosha was a big sister. She had 5 younger siblings: Hakeem, Rashad, Brianna, Herman Jr., and Jaden. She was the oldest. And if you've ever been the oldest in a family like that, you already know what that means. You're not just a sibling, you're an example. You're the one who goes first, who figures things out ahead of everyone else, who the younger ones watch, sometimes without you even knowing it. And at 25, Keosha was striving for success. She was working as an assistant manager at Radio Shack. She showed up, she understood responsibility, and that earned her a level of trust in her workplace. She had the kind of consistency that other people rely on, but her eyes were further ahead than that job. Keosha had a creative side that was just as real as her work ethic. She wanted to be a fashion designer. She had dreams of opening her own boutique one day, her own space, her own vision, something entirely hers. And she was engaged. She was in a relationship with a man named Mark Finley. They had a life forming between them. They were living with his family in Mattapan, saving towards something, planning towards something. They live a life that was a testament of people won't just living, but someone building step by step in the way that young people do when they actually believe in their future. As I worked through Keosha's case, one thing kept coming back to me. There was nothing in her life that pointed toward danger. No conflict following her around. No situation she couldn't walk away from. She was engaged to someone she loved. She had a job, a plan, a family that adored her, and a best friend who would later describe her in that same courtroom as an amazing, kind-hearted, all-around angel from God. She was 25. She was in the prime of her life, moving forward with purpose, and yet none of that protected her. Now let me take you back to February 19, 2012. It was a Sunday, cold the way Boston winters are, not dramatic, just heavy and gray. Mark Finley had finished his shift at his Radio Shack location in Boston and driven over to pick Keosha up from hers at the Dedham Mall. That was their routine. They worked for the same company, different stores, and on nights like this, Mark would come get her. They drove back to Alabama Street in Mattapan. That was home, a residential street. Mark had grown up there. His family lived there. It was familiar ground, safe ground. When they pulled up, they didn't go inside right away. They sat in Mark's 1998 Cadillac, just talking, probably decompressing after a long Sunday. Catching up the way couples do at the end of a day when they've been in separate places. Just a quiet pause before going inside. But someone else was already there, and that someone was watching them. A figure dressed in all black began moving toward the car, not rushing, not hesitating, just walking deliberately directly toward the passenger side, toward Keosha's side, and before either of them could process what was happening, the man raised a firearm and discharged it twice through the window. 2 rounds, at close range. Keosha was struck in the head and in the chest, and then he turned and walked away, crossed Alabama Street, disappeared into the night. Mark got out of that car. He went to her. He held her there on the passenger side, in the cold, until help came. When emergency services arrived, that's where they found him, outside the car, holding Keosha, not running, not panicking, just holding her. Like if he could just hold on long enough, maybe it wouldn't be real. Keosha was still alive when the ambulance came. She was rushed to the hospital, still fighting. And the people who loved her, her mother, her family, Mark, they gathered, and they waited, and they hoped. Gloria Weathersby, her mother, later said she never left her daughter's side. They stayed through all of it, all the uncertainty, all the hours, all the not knowing. But the injuries were too severe. On February 20, 2012, one day after she had been sitting in that car, just talking, Keosha Nicole Gilmore passed away. She was 25 years old. Now, investigators arrived on Alabama Street on the night of the incident, and they began working through the scene, trying to understand what had just happened. And almost immediately, the scene started telling them something. Keosha's purse was still in the car, untouched. Nothing had been taken, nothing disturbed. This wasn't a robbery, that much was clear. But then there was the other thing, which was mind-bugging. There had been 2 people in that car. Mark was sitting right there, but the firearm had only ever been directed one way. One person had been the focus. One person had been chosen. That meant this was personal. Mark told investigators what he could. He described a man in all black. He told them about the direction he walked when he left. And he mentioned one detail, small but specific, that he thought he might have heard a gate opening and then closing just after the man crossed the street. That detail led investigators to New Calvary Cemetery, which sat close to the scene. And in the cemetery, they found something. 2 drawstring bags had been discarded on the grounds. Inside them, a firearm, a hat, a pair of latex gloves, and a water bottle. Whoever did this had planned ahead. The gloves were there for a reason. The bags were to carry and then discard. This was thought out. This was deliberate. This was, as the assistant DA would later describe it in court, a targeted act with clear intent. The items were collected and sent for testing. DNA was recovered, and a profile was built. But when that profile was run through CODIS, the National DNA Database, there was no match. Whoever had left those items behind had never been arrested before, had never had their DNA entered into the system. And just like that, the case hit a wall. Investigators kept working. They interviewed Mark more thoroughly, learned about a prior chapter in his past that involved street activity, and looked hard at whether what happened to Keosha had any connection to that. But nothing held. No active threats, no ongoing conflicts. And from all indication, Mark and Keosha were doing what people do when they're preparing to get married. They were building a life. Then detectives turned to Keosha's workplace. They heard about a former employee she had let go after discovering he had been involved in illegal activity out of the Radio Shack store. They looked into it. They interviewed him, and he was ruled out. And with no other leads to pursue and a DNA profile sitting in a file with no name attached to it, the case went cold. Months passed, and then close to a full year. February 2013, almost exactly 1 year after Keosha was taken, a local television station, Fox 25, ran a segment on her case as part of their series called New England's Unsolved. Her story went back out into the world, back onto people's screens, back into the conversations of people who had known her, remembered her, loved her. And for Keosha's stepmother, watching that segment triggered something. She started thinking about a man from Keosha's past. Someone she had known going back to middle school. Someone who used to give her rides as a teenager to her stepmother's hair salon. And the stepmother remembered something that had always felt off to her. This man would come into that salon and just sit there, watching Keosha work. Not in the way a friend sits and waits, in a way that made her stepmother deeply uncomfortable. Something in how he watched, something that she could never fully forget. His name was Christopher Jackson, she told investigators, and Keosha's mother, Gloria, confirmed she remembered him too. Jackson had been in Keosha's orbit for years. He would give her rides. They'd talk. They'd spend time together the way people who grew up in the same neighborhood sometimes do. But at some point, Jackson's feelings had moved beyond friendship, and Keosha's hadn't. She kept things platonic, consistently and clearly. And as the years went by, as Keosha moved through her 20s and into her engagement with Mark, she had started to pull back from Jackson altogether. A pullback orchestrated by distance, the natural kind that happens when a chapter closes. But for Jackson, apparently, that chapter hadn't closed. Gloria Weathersby would later say something that is deeply troubling. She said she believed that in his mind, he had been waiting, that if he stuck around long enough, stayed present in Keosha's life, she would eventually notice him the way he wanted her to. But that wasn't the case, because Keosha had moved on with her life. And that gap between what he imagined and what was real was apparently something he couldn't accept. Detectives made contact with Christopher Jackson and asked him to come in. On February 13, 2013, he arrived at Boston Police Headquarters and agreed to speak without a lawyer present. He was cooperative, calm. He described his relationship with Keosha as casual, distant. Just people who knew each other from school, nothing significant. He minimized it, played it down. But before he left the station that day, detectives asked him for something, a DNA swab, and he agreed to that too. Then the investigators waited again, because DNA processing takes time, weeks sometimes, and it would take close to 2 months in this case before the results came back from the lab. They came back in April 2013. The DNA taken from Christopher Jackson was a match, a direct match to the DNA recovered from the items found in New Calvary Cemetery, the firearm, the gloves, the hat, the water bottle, all of it connected back to him. On April 5th, 2013, Jackson was brought back in. This time, he was read his Miranda rights before the conversation started. And this time, when detectives confronted him with what they had, the story he had told in February started to fall apart. He didn't confess outright. He told them he had made the mistake of letting his anger overshadow his intelligence. He was taken into custody, charged with first-degree homicide. And after investigators executed a search warrant on his home, they found, tucked under his bed, 2 composition notebooks. Inside them, Jackson had written about Keosha extensively. poetry about her, thoughts about her. One of the notebooks was dedicated to her, with a line written beneath the dedication that read, "A love never to be mine." He had known on some level that what he felt was not returned. He had written it down, and then he had still chosen to act. The trial began in May 2016, 4 years after Keosha was taken from her family on that Mattapan street. Prosecutors laid out a case built on obsession, entitlement, and calculated intent. They argued that Jackson had used a long friendship to position himself close to Keosha, that he had learned her schedule and her routines, that he had been following her to and from work after she made clear she wasn't interested, that on the night of February 19th, he knew exactly where she would be, and he went there with a plan. The defense argued something different. They acknowledged that Jackson was responsible for Keosha's passing. They didn't contest the act. What they contested was the level of intent. Defense attorneys presented evidence that Jackson had been a special needs student growing up, that developmental issues had affected his mental capacity in ways that should matter legally, that he could not have met the threshold required for first-degree premeditated intent. The jury deliberated and came back with a verdict, guilty on the second-degree count, not the first-degree charge. The element of advanced planning hadn't been proven to their satisfaction beyond a reasonable doubt. Judge Rafi Yesayan sentenced Christopher Jackson to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. On the day of sentencing, Keosha's family spoke. Her best friend stood in that courtroom and called her an amazing, kind-hearted, all-around angel from God. Her stepfather, Herman Weathersby, said she was very bright, friendly, and full of life, that she had her whole life ahead of her, and that she did not deserve to have it taken from her this way. And then Gloria Weathersby, her mother, stood up. She said her family still deals with fear and depression and panic attacks. She said they deal with self-blame. That word, self-blame, the way it shows up in grief and makes no sense, and yet is somehow always there. She said they deal with fatigue and nightmares and mood swings. She said that, for the first time in her life, she was dealing with hopelessness, that she had not had a full night of rest since she lost her daughter. And then she said something directly to Christopher Jackson. She said, "May my God, that walks with me, walk with you and your family. You just have to answer for what you've done." And before she sat down, she said this about her daughter, the words she wanted the court to hold on to. Keosha was a friend to everyone she met, including Mr. Christopher Jackson. She was sensitive to others' needs, compassionate, caring, non-judgmental. I will never see Keosha get married. I'll never be a grandmother to her children. She'll never be a wife or a mother herself. We'll never know what her future would have been. I feel like a part of me is missing. It's like a limb is gone. There's something about this case that doesn't let go, not because of the investigation or the DNA or even the notebooks. It's the simpler thing underneath all of it. Keosha was a friend to him, even to him. That's what her mother said. She had treated Christopher Jackson with the same kindness she treated everyone. And what he did with that kindness was study her, learn her schedule, follow her to work. And then one night in February, he walked up to that car and took her life. Because she didn't want to be with him. She had done everything right. She kept the friendship platonic. She created distance when she needed to. She moved forward with her life. She said no in the quiet, measured way that women are always told is the right way to say it. No drama, no confrontation, just boundaries. And it wasn't enough to keep her safe. Keosha Nicole Gilmore was born on November 11th, 1986. She was a daughter, a sister, a fiancée, a friend. She wanted to be a fashion designer. She wanted a boutique of her own someday. She had a mother who loved her so completely that years later, in that courtroom, the grief hadn't faded at all. It had only deepened. She was 25 years old, and she deserved every single day that came after that. Rest in peace, Keosha.